In this hands-on exercise, we're going to get to play around a little bit with Flume. We're going to install Flume on 2 machines. We'll actually, in this video, fake it on the single Quick Start VM for simplicity's sake. We'll also configure each of these agents to, on the first agent, pull a log file, which would be on our quote-unquote first machine, and that agent will then put its results to a local port, and the second agent will pull from that local port and send the output of that log file into HDFS. This would be agent 2 on our quote-unquote second machine. We'll start our agents up, and we'll watch the data flow into HDFS. In the required bucket, you need to have been through the HDFS chapter, as well as the Flume Basics chapter. And for this to really work the best, you would ideally run this on the Installing Hadoop from CDH with Cloudera Manager 4-node cluster in Amazon Web Services, or in our case, for simplicity's sake, we're going to run it in the Quick Start VM itself. You're going to get the most out of this video if you've been through all previous chapters up to date. Please hop with me over to your VM, or if you have the 4-node cluster up, hop into there, and we're going to pop open a terminal. Let's pop open a second terminal. We're going to do our old familiar copy and paste of commands, and we're going to cd into code and data, code, and this time Flume Basics. And when we do our ls in this directory, we're going to see not only our typical Flume exercises, we're going to also see a couple other files. This log generator is going to mimic some log output that we're going to then read in our first agent, and then our first agent is going to send it to agent 2. And these are each of the config files for these 2 agents. So let's first start off by doing a less on this Flume exercises command, so we can copy and paste the output. The very first thing that we need to do is install Flume on each of the machines that we're going to be running. So in this case, it's a single machine. So we're just going to run it on this one single machine. This will actually install the Flume ng package. Just push yes when prompted. And as that's running, let's go ahead and tee up the install of our agent. This will actually auto start our agent on reboot of the server. And let's paste that install the agent as well. And again, when prompted, go ahead and push yes. And that went ahead and installed those agents. Now let's go ahead in this second window and cd into our Flume exercises directory. And let's actually look at each of our config files one by one. So first, let's look at agent 1. These config files have very similar setup, and you can see there after I pushed that less on the Flume agent 1 properties, it started spitting out the output of this agent itself. So this agent number 1 is reading its data from this temp log generator. And here at the top of the script, you see that we're just setting up some arbitrary names for our agent itself, as well as the source, the channel, and the sink. And remember, the source is where we get the data, the channel is where we persist the data between the source and the sink, and then the sink is where we put the data to. So each of these config files, each of these Flume agent properties files, represents pretty much the minimum configuration that you would need in order to run an agent. So here you see the very first thing that we do is set up our sources, as indicated by this sources indicator right here. We're setting up an exec command, and then we're saying a tail-f or a follow of this file. This is where we're reading our data from. And we're going to then put that data to the agent 1 channel that we set up right here. The second part that we're doing here is setting up our channel. We're setting up a memory 1000 event buffer. So again, the type of config that you're going to run depends on the type of agent or channel or source that you're using. In this case, because it's a memory channel, the capacity is specified as the number of events. The disk channel would additionally need to know where we're going to store the data locally on disk. And if we can, let's go ahead and push the down arrow a couple times to see through the very bottom of this file. Here, we're setting up our sink, and we're saying that we're going to write this output every time we fill up 1000 event buffer in the memory. We're going to write that as an Avro data type to the localhost port quad 5. And again, you can choose any arbitrary port that's open on the machine. We're saying that the batch size, every time that we fill up the buffer with a batch of 1, we're going to output data and present it to this port quad 5. And again, we're pulling that data from our agent 1 channel. Let's go ahead and push quit here. And let's do a less on our second agent. We'll see how these two work closely together. And we'll paste the command back here. We see again we're getting our output. We're setting up here at the top, again, some arbitrary names for our source, our channel, and our sink. And in this case, we're pulling our data from where our agent 1 put its data out to. So this Avro data type is going to be important for us to parse the data. We're pulling it from localhost port 5555 and then putting that to agent 2 channel. And again, we're using a memory 1000 event buffer for the channel itself. And if we push down arrow a couple times, we see that our sync is the really important thing here. So as before, we had a type of Avro for a sync and a local port that we were putting it to. This time we're using a type of HDFS. So we're actually going to write the data into HDFS, and we have to specify a path and a file prefix. So Flume will write into this user Cloudera Flume directory, and it will write flume.log dot and then some gobbledygook, I believe it's year, month, day, and some second information and arbitrary characters after that. But every file in this directory will have flume.log dot and then all that other stuff. And again, where we're pulling the data from is the agent 2 channel that we set up here. And again, obviously these arbitrary names for our channel, our source, and our sync all need to match throughout the file. We could have put this Flume agent 1 and agent 2 config all in just one single file, but we're doing it this case in 2 files to have it make more sense. Again, if you are running this on the 4-node cluster, you would need to both set up Flume on each of the machines that you're going to run it in, and then you would just copy the agent 1 file to your etc Hadoop conf and the agent 2 file to the etc Hadoop conf on the second machine, whereas the first machine would just get agent 1. And then the startup for each agent would just happen on that single machine. Here we're doing it all inside of one machine. And obviously the other thing you would have to do if you were running it in the 4-node cluster is instead of this localhost port, you would want to put it to the remote host port. And in AWS, probably the thing that would make the most sense is the private IP address. So you would write it to the private IP address of maybe the second machine, and then the second machine would read it from its local host. So let's go ahead and push Q to get out of our less command, and let's actually copy these files in our VM into our etc Hadoop conf directory, that standard directory where we know all of our Hadoop configuration lives. And that went ahead and copied the files up. And back over here, let's go ahead and push down arrow a couple times to get to the next part of our instructions. The next thing we need to do is actually create that Flume directory in HDFS. So let's go ahead and create that directory. And of course, if we see no output back out, we know that it got put in. And now let's go ahead and start our log generator script. So this script is going to output data to /temp/log-generator.log. This will be the file that we then use to get our data into our agent 1. So let's go ahead and push enter there, and we can see right away this script is just simply kicking out some information about an HTTP return code, the actual URL that was hit, the path of the file, and then maybe the remote IP address. So every 2 seconds, this is going to output a new set of, I believe, 1,000 records. Let's go ahead and open a second terminal and maybe put this one a little bit below here. In this second terminal, let's do an output of that file. So let's go ahead and tail that log generator. And we see that it is, in fact, outputting all this data as we suspected. The directions say in the same terminal as we ran the tail. Let's go ahead and kill with a Control-C. And let's go ahead and clear this data inside of there. This time in the second window, let's go ahead and start up our second agent. So this would be the agent that is finally writing data into HDFS. And as that one's starting up, let's tee up the start of our first agent. And let's actually open yet a third terminal. And let's kind of space these things out a little bit so we can see some output from each one. And it doesn't matter that we have a whole bunch of info, so let's actually space them out like this. And in this third terminal, let's go ahead and paste our output of our agent 1. Let's walk through in detail on this first agent. We need to specify the configuration directory. So this is where it's going to read configuration files that we need. And then the actual config file that we're starting up for each one is agent 1 for the first and agent 2 for the second. So you can see that the 2 matches on agent 2 and the 1 matches on agent 1. And let's go ahead and start that agent up. Now let's space these things out so we see some good output from each. So what's really happening is This Python log generator script is outputting data into HDFS. The agent 1 down here is reading that data, and then it's pumping it to agent 2. So we see agent 2 doing all kinds of crazy writes back into here. And let's actually go back and open a fourth terminal, and let's see what it's writing into HDFS. So here we say that we're going to run a Hadoop fs-ls on the flume directory, and we'll actually spit out a date command after that. So let's copy this command and paste it in our new terminal that we just opened. And we should see a whole bunch of data, as we see from our second agent, being written into this other directory. Again, Flume is doing what could be considered a small files problem in HDFS. So if you have a whole bunch of this data coming in, you can see that our last one was 542. We should see several more files come in after that when we run the command a second time. Hadoop is creating a lot of these little less than 1,000 byte files, and you can see that each one is incrementing up and going up. Because this is actually filling HDFS up with a ton of data, let's go ahead and stop the writes. So let's go ahead and push Control-C in our agent 2 to kill that agent. Let's push Control-C in agent 1, and then let's push Control-C where we started up the script with that load generator.py script. So we saw that Flume was actually inputting a whole bunch of data in here. Let's actually go ahead and look at one of these files directly. And let's see what's in there. So let's just copy one of them and do an edit copy. Make sure you're not copying a .temp file, because that's one that Flume just opens up to be able to write the bytes into it. And it's not completed. It's not a closed file yet. So again, let's go ahead and copy that information, and let's do a Hadoop fs-cat on this file. And let's go ahead and paste the particular file name back out. So again, we see flume.log. And then a whole bunch of information. And we can see that sure enough, looks like this is an Avro data type, as we specified before. So again, the first agent was reading the output of our temp loggenerator.log file. It was putting that to the second agent. The second agent was taking those contents and then dumping it into HDFS. So we did just about the most simplistic two-node agent data flow that we could do. You're welcome to play with Flume quite a bit more, and there's a lot of cool stuff in here. When you are finished using it, you can always go in and then remove your log generator and all of your Flume files. In fact, let's go ahead and do this just to make sure that we've cleaned up and we don't have a bunch of extra stuff laying around. We can run these commands really in any of our 4 terminals that we have open. Paste our removal of our temp log generator, and then remove all of our Flume files. This is probably the most important step. Copy this command out and paste it in another terminal, and that will get rid of all the data that we pumped into Flume. And you can see there was a whole bunch of data that was coming out of there. Again, I kind of set this file up in order to be able to see a whole bunch of data coming through very, very quickly to show you how responsive Flume can be. So let's go ahead and truly clean up and exit out of all of our terminals and make it nice and clean for our next exercise. I hope you enjoyed that tour of Flume. In this exercise, we installed Flume on 2 machines. Ideally, you did it in the 4-node cluster. In this case, we did it in the Quick Start VM by sort of faking it. We then configured each of the appropriate agents, started our agents up, and then watched the data flow very, very quickly into HDFS.